Commonwealth has accused Karen Reed of striking her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, with her car after a night of drinking and leaving him in the snow to die. The defense is saying, as they said in their opening statement, that Karen Reed was framed and this is all a cover up. We have just finished closing arguments in the Commonwealth versus Karen Reed. The court took a brief break before reading the jury instructions. The judge believes it will take about an hour to read those, and then the jury will get the case. And then after we do the jury instructions, we will talk about the instruction that none of the lawyers talked about on the involuntary manslaughter the court said that they were giving yesterday. None of the attorneys addressed it. The attorneys didn't talk about the instructions at all, which was something I always did. The instructions can be difficult. The prosecution normally walks through the elements and then says, these are the elements that show that this is what happened. But Lally spent so much time talking about Jen McCabe's testimony and the snow and the hills, and that he was running out of time by the time he said, very briefly said, that the defendant drove in reverse over 24 miles an hour, struck John O'Keefe, causing catastrophic head injury and causing his death. So I ask you to return a vote of guilty. Why save the most important part of your closing till you are run out of time? It was mind-boggling to me. He didn't address it early on. He kind of said in a snarky way, the murder hadn't happened yet. But he started his closing with, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. In opening, that was only 3. And it is kind of wild to me the way his closing went. I thought his closing was better than his opening. I thought it was more clear than his opening. But I imagine when you guys see that juxtaposed with Alan Jackson's closing, who used to be a major crimes prosecutor in LA, I think you see the difference in how these attorneys presented their case. But what was so interesting to me is that they both kind of had the same theme of their closing. Both sides seem to argue in their closings. The other side is saying, look away. The other side is saying, ignore this, ignore that. The other side is obfuscating. The other side is trying to fool you. But on both sides, they argued it. And then Lally didn't talk at all about his reconstructionist, and he barely talked about the other reconstructionist, barely touched it. The only time he mentioned the reconstructionists from the Fed investigation was to say that the taillight couldn't have cracked hitting John O'Keefe's car and that the arm must have been bent, but that's not what his reconstructionist said. And I saw some of you asking, well, does Alan Jackson get to go up again and rebut it? No, though I'm sure Alan wanted to because he is a former prosecutor. In this court, and it might be in this jurisdiction, the prosecution didn't get a rebuttal. It was Jackson and then the prosecutor, and the prosecutor went second because he bears the burden of proof. It just feels so official that we are now officially on verdict watch. I think there will be some things for them to go over, especially when we're talking about those lesser included crimes. The prosecution charged Karen Reed with 3 things: the second degree murder, the operating under the influence causing death, and the leaving the scene of the crime resulting in death. Under the operating while intoxicated or the operating under the influence, there are 2 lesser includeds. And what the court said is, by law, these lesser includeds are included. So this is not the DA doing this thing or that thing. It is literally by law, if you have this charge, these are the included charges. The DA and the defense agreed that they were not seeking to have a lesser included of just operating under the influence. They opted to not put that in there. But the way the instructions read, it sounded like to me, the way the instructions were read, is that these were legally required. If you have this charge, these 2 things are legally required under it. That includes the driving under the influence causing death. involuntary manslaughter and the motor vehicle homicide, which is the lowest. So as you're going to go through there, you're going to have the most serious charge, then the next, because the motor vehicle homicide just includes that negligent driving. So we're going to talk about those real quick, because if they determine that she didn't hit him with the car, it's not going to take them that long to go through these, because again, all of them are predicated on her hitting him with the car in some way. But there is language in there that I think could have been argued, that none of the attorneys argued, that it didn't involve hitting him with the car. But the prosecution was so in their theory, there was no way they could get around it because they elevated the charges, even though the reconstructionist said, could he have been sideswiped and fallen backwards and then she left him there? Could the prosecution have argued he threw a glass at the car, she sideswiped him, and he fell backwards, and then she left? And hypothermia is a huge part of this case. Could they have argued that? Yes, but their investigation was so outcome determinative from the beginning that they were already like locked into the arm was out and she hit him and blah, blah, blah. I think they were locked in based on their investigators and those reports that they couldn't really shift gears. So with the involuntary manslaughter, lesser included, caused the death, intended the conduct, and the conduct was wanton and reckless. And then the court defined all of those. So 3 elements on the involuntary manslaughter, which in Massachusetts still carries a max of 20 years. So the involuntary manslaughter is a lesser included, but it's not a low sentencing. It's not New Mexico where the max on the invol is 18 months. In Massachusetts, the max on the invol is very high, but the max on the driving under the influence causing death, that is a 20-year max, but a 5-year minimum. So with that, you have to do 5 years. So with the invol, it is that 20-year max, but there is no mandatory minimum. I didn't check the motor vehicle homicide, but I will when we take a little bit of a break. And that is the operating the motor vehicle on a public road. So this is more like the language of a DUI. Was under the influence or 0.08 or more while operating, was negligent while operating, and then caused the death of John O'Keefe. Again, all of these charges center around caused the death of John O'Keefe. So when you get to the lesser included, did it cause the death? And then they talk about the chain of events. So if the jury is going through the chain of events, they need to look at the way the prosecution presented it. So even if the jury thinks they could have been fighting and she backed up and he threw a glass at the car and he jumped out of the way and slipped and fell and hit his head, and then she just was like, fuck it, and left him there because she thought he was going to get up and go into the house and go to the party or whatever. That's not what the prosecution presented. That's not what the prosecution argued. So I think even if the jury's like, well, I mean, maybe that could make sense, but that's not what they said. I don't think the jury is going to fight for a theory to fit, but maybe they will. So in all of those things, you're really looking at she caused the death of John O'Keefe. But some of those charges don't mean she hit him. So could they say, yeah, her leaving him there was causing the death? Yeah, maybe. I don't know if they'll get there. You know why? Because the prosecution didn't argue it. The prosecution said she hit him with the car. So I don't think the jury's going to be looking for a theory that's not that. For deep dives into the stories that I covered here, you can find them on my YouTube channel at The Emily D. Baker and The Emily Show podcast. I stream every Tuesday and Thursday. The podcast goes live on Wednesdays. And if you want to stay in the loop with everything I'm doing, receive the fastest notifications out there, and get more Law Nerd community, join me at Law